So we're going to start here with something that bothers me. As you know, things often do bother me. There's certain things that Christians say that I take any opportunity I can when I'm talking to try to get us to understand what the Bible is and how we interpret it, what we do with it. And Christians do something with the Bible that is so incorrect, but it's also kind of hurtful as far as people that are non-believers getting past certain hurdles. I don't know if that matters. But I just want to talk about it. It might be interesting. It might not. If you fall asleep, try not to snore. Here we go. This story starts somewhere around 730 BCE. Long, long time ago. And there was a king in Judah named Ahaz. Do you remember Ahaz? Do you know anything about the kings of Judah? The entire Old Testament is basically about what happened with the kings of Judah. But we won't talk about that too much. And here is a chart, because I like charts. It's really important. Everything in the Old Testament, when you learn this, centers around two major events, but one of them is really, really, really major. And so this talks about, and I won't spend too much time here, I just wanted to show you. In 722 BC, which is about 8 years after the scripture we're going to look at, in 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire came into northern Israel. Israel was divided. Israel has 12 tribes, and after the reign of Solomon, when his son Rehoboam came into power, the kingdom was divided into the north and the south. Very similar to the United States. There was actually a civil war, and what we're talking about today is going to be civil war that was happening in Israel. The northern kingdom followed Jeroboam, no relation to Rehoboam, and they formed a northern kingdom with their capital in Samaria. The southern kingdom was Judah and Benjamin. Benjamin is insignificant because in an earlier story in Judges, which we've actually talked before, but you probably don't remember, the rest of Israel almost wiped Benjamin off the face of the earth. They're really, really little. You remember? See? What book is it found in? It's in Judges. So, anyway, we just call the southern kingdom Judah, and everybody forgets Benjamin. Although Paul, the Apostle Paul, he is a Benjamite, which always makes me think of Vegemite, which makes me think of the song, Do You Come From the Land Down Under? But I'll move on. By the way, I want to talk about the rest of this. And then in 586, see, this is Assyria. The northern kingdom was dispersed. It's called the diaspora. And they were dispersed throughout the entire known world at the time, basically, and never returned. Never. They're just blended into the culture of the nations that they went to. Then in 586 BC, in this green line right here, this is kind of Iraq, this is kind of Turkey, and this is southern Iraq, that's northern. Anyway, 586 BC, Judah was taken captive to Babylon. And the entire Old Testament is about that event. Looking back at how we came to that, and then during that, and then what happened after that. Almost nobody ever says that in a church service. But the entire Old Testament is about the fact that Judah was exiled. Okay? So we are in the few years before the first diaspora, the taking of the northern kingdom into captivity. If you have questions like, why are we talking about this? Or something like that, you can text them during the time we're talking. Or you can just raise your hand. When Ahaz, son of Jotham and grandson of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Syria, and Pekah, who used to be the name of my wife's dog, Pekah, son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, set out to attack Jerusalem. However, they were unable to carry out their plan. This is where you read because it's on the list of things to read, if I'm reading through the Bible, but nobody pays attention to anything that's talking about here. But I'm going to tell you, the king of Syria and the northern kingdom decided we're going to attack Judah. because they're not paying us taxes like we want them to. And we're going to install a vassal king in his place. This is giving you the summation before they tell the story. These two kings were trying to attack Judah, which is in the south, but they couldn't do it. That is what Isaiah chapter 7 is about. That these two kings are going to attack the southern king, because Syria is up here, northern kingdom, here's Judah. That's what the story is about. The news had come to the royal court of Judah. Syria is allied with Israel against us. So the hearts of the king and his people trembled with fear, like trees shaking in a storm. The people of Judah, it would be like if we found out that the rest of the United States and Canada is about to attack Waynesville. Okay? And they want to destroy us. Well, everybody is afraid. I mean, we've got our AR-15s probably somewhere. I don't know, some of you guys do. But they have tanks and nuclear weapons. So that's kind of the feeling that's going on. Ahaz is scared, you-know-whatless. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Isaiah is the prophet. Now, when we think prophet, many people think a prophet is a person that sees the future. Maybe, kind of, occasionally, I don't know. But the prophet in the Old Testament was someone that was kind of the mouthpiece, the spokesperson for God. He's not necessarily talking about the future, but he's speaking for what God wants to say to you. Take your son, Shear-Jashub, and go out to meet King Ahaz. I won't even talk about why that guy's name means that, why he was named that. You will find him at the end of the aqueduct that feeds water in the upper pool near the road leading to the field where cloth is washed. So you all should go, oh yeah, I know that place. Tell him to stop worrying. Tell him he doesn't need to fear the fierce anger of those two burned out embers, King Rezin of Syria and Pekah, son of Remaliah. God is saying through Isaiah, these guys are has-beens. Their bark is bigger than their bite. Stop worrying that you're going to be destroyed. Yes, the kings of Syria and Israel are plotting against him, saying, we will attack Judah and capture it for ourselves, then we will install the son of Tabeel as Judah's king. But this is what the sovereign Lord says. This invasion will never happen. It will never take place. For Syria is no stronger than its capital Damascus, and Damascus is no stronger than its king Rezin. As for Israel, within 65 years, it will be crushed and completely destroyed. When he says Israel, he means the northern kingdoms. I'm talking about Judah, two separate places. Israel is no stronger than its capital, Samaria. And Samaria is no stronger than its king, Pekah, son of Remaliah. Unless your faith is firm, I cannot make you stand. So God is basically saying, don't sweat this. I got you. Okay? Because King Ahaz feels completely isolated and alone. Everybody around him, the 10 other tribes who are supposed to be our brothers, are against us. And they've went and got a bigger dude, Syria, to help them fight us. He feels completely alone, as if God has forsaken them. What are we going to do? That's the point of what Isaiah 7 is about. But later the Lord sent this message to King Ahaz. He said, ask the Lord your God for a sign of confirmation. God is saying, I know this is hard for you to believe, so ask me to do something, and I will show you that what I'm saying is true. Make it as difficult as you want, as high as heaven or as deep as the place of the dead. But the king refused. And he said, nope, I'll not test the Lord like that. According to Isaiah, later, that's one reason Ahaz wasn't the king down the road, because he's sort of disrespecting the prophet. Anyway, all right then, the Lord said, the Lord himself will give you the sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Now, how many of you have ever heard this verse? The Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. You'll call his name. You've heard that? How many of you, just be honest, those of you watching, have never heard the other verses? That you didn't know this was a story about a king in 730 BCE that was scared because 2 other kings were about to attack him and destroy his nation. How many of you, around Christmas time, when someone quotes this verse, you hear the rest of those verses? From the same people that when I talked to them all year ago, context, you got to give me context. But they don't even know these verses exist. Because at Christmas time, we got to post something on Facebook, or we got to get a plaque or a t-shirt, we got to have something to talk about on Sunday, and we pull this verse out, and we say, look, it's predicting that Jesus is going to come and be born of a virgin. Now, if you didn't know Jesus, and we were in 730 BCE, is there anything about this that would make you think, you know, honey, there's going to be a Savior come. He's going to be born of a virgin. It's going to be awesome. He's going to save the world. Is there anything in that would make you think that? Do you know why? Because there's nothing in there to make you think that. This is a story about a king in 730 BCE. It's not a story about Jesus being born. That's where people start throwing rocks at me. Now, this word virgin, Matthew, this is what, and I said last week I wasn't going to talk about this, which I didn't last week. But Matthew, having been, and this is the point, and I have a hard time getting it across. I think I've been very ineffective at it. When I saw it, it made me see the impact, the revolutionary impact that Jesus had on these Jewish guys that knew this story and knew this isn't predicting a Messiah. They knew that. But Matthew has been so impacted, and his idea of who God is has been turned inside out, upside down by Jesus, that he reaches back to this story when trying to explain how he was born. Now, these guys have been around Mary. Mary, did you know? Yes, she knew. And she shared different things. Luke, we're going to read Luke's, if I can get through this without giving you too much detail. We're going to read Luke's account. Luke had time with Mary after Jesus' death and resurrection. They're getting some accounts of this is how he was born. And she's telling them, I was a virgin. Well, I'm sure they found it hard to believe. But then after the death and resurrection of Jesus, Matthew is contemplating, how do I tell the story of who he is? And he reaches back into this story to compare it to Jesus. Now, in this story, the word virgin is alma, which simply means, in the Hebrew, simply means young woman. Now, you understand that the Old Testament, 100 years or so before Jesus' birth, was translated into Greek. The Hellenization of the Middle Eastern area, Greek was kind of a primary language. The Jewish people still speak Aramaic, but the Old Testament was translated into Greek. It's called the Septuagint. And so in the Septuagint version of the, by the way, virgin in Hebrew is Betula. It's Alma in Isaiah 7:14. Even if it was talking about Jesus, it doesn't say virgin. It simply says young woman. And frankly, in the original Hebrew, it doesn't say an Alma will conceive. It says an Alma has conceived. Okay? That's important. It's important to me because I find it interesting. But in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the word there is parthenos, which is virgin. So Matthew uses the Greek Old Testament to make a point. Now, go back to Isaiah. Isaiah says to King Ahaz, a virgin, an Alma, a young woman, has conceived. And by the time this child is old enough to choose what is right and reject what is wrong, he'll be eating yogurt and honey. Okay? For before the child is that old, the child that's already been conceived, before the child's that old, the lands of the 2 kings you fear so much will both be deserted. What he's saying is, here's the sign. it's not going to be but a couple years, and those kings, not only will they not attack you, they won't even exist. This is a prophecy about what happened to the northern kingdom of Israel and Syria. They were taken away captive by Assyria, the empire. And God is saying, there's already a lady that's pregnant, and before her kid's 3, 4, 5 years old, these kings that you're so worried about will be gone. So the question is this passage predicting a miraculous birth? No, it's not. When Matthew says this fulfills what was spoken by the prophet, saying a virgin will conceive and bear a son, will call his name Emmanuel. They didn't call his name Emmanuel. This is me in Sunday school as a child. Yes, Mark, what is it? I thought they called his name Jesus. Well, they did. Well, Matthew said they'll call his name Emmanuel. Yeah, that's what we call him. God's with us. I don't call him that. I call him Jesus. Matthew is saying, just like Isaiah was trying to tell Ahaz, don't worry, God is with you. Jesus actually is. God came to earth. It's amazing. He is with us. And that's why he uses this passage from Isaiah. Okay, I see you're excited. Okay, this is random things about Christmas, kind of. So now I want to move to something that actually did predict something about a Messiah. In Daniel, it was the first year of Darius the Mede. You remember that. When did Darius the Mede rule? Anybody know? Huh? No, this is just the first year. Darius the Mede, the Medes and the Persians came in, and have you ever heard anybody say, the writing's on the wall? Mm-hmm. Well, where's that come from? Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar. Do you remember Nebuchadnezzar? If you watch VeggieTales, the bunny, something, the bunny, that's Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon that took Judah to exile in 586. His son Belshazzar saw the hand that wrote on the wall that said, "Mene, mene, tekel upharsin." Mm-hmm. Anybody? Yeah. What does that mean?
I forget.
The kingdom is taken from you and is given to the Medes and the Persians. Darius the Mede was the guy in charge that overtook. He took over the Babylonian Empire. The people of Israel are still in exile. To make matters worse, the people that captured us and took us to exile, they have now been destroyed. And so here we are with a brand new government. We don't know anything about it. Darius the Mede, he was the son of Ahasuerus, who I always enjoyed that name. If you're pregnant, anybody pregnant, here's a good Bible name. Name your son Ahasuerus, who became the king of the Babylonians. During the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, learned from reading the word of the Lord as revealed by Jeremiah the prophet that Jerusalem must lie desolate for 70 years. What the heck does that mean? Okay, Daniel, you guys should read your Bible. It's great. Daniel is sitting here in Babylon. Okay, we're in captivity. We're not in our land. And to make matters worse, we have new captors. And so he begins to read the book of Jeremiah. And he finds in Jeremiah, because I guess Daniel didn't read his Bible very much, he discovers that Jeremiah, of course the Bible wasn't put together. It's the fact that he could find something from Jeremiah is amazing. He begins to read in Jeremiah that Jeremiah had predicted that when the exile happens, because Jeremiah predicted it, it's only going to last 70 years. Don't worry, 70 years. It really only lasted about 56 years when they started coming back. That's another thing we can talk about. Why wasn't Jeremiah perfectly accurate? Anyway, so Daniel begins to see, we're only supposed to be here 70 years, and somehow we're going to be able to get taken back. So I turned to the Lord and pleaded with him in prayer and fasting. Daniel begins to pray about what he's found in the Bible. Hey, God, 70 years, it's getting close. Hey, let's do something about this. And he wore burlap. As I was praying, Gabriel, this is an angel, whom I had seen in the earlier vision, came swiftly to me at the time of the evening sacrifice. He explained to me, Daniel, I've come here to give you insight and understanding. So Daniel's in exile. He's trying to figure out, oh, do we have to stay here forever? Or is this temporary? Is God going to deliver us? And I won't get too much into this, but a period, this is what Gabriel says, a period of 70 sets of 7 has been decreed for you people and your holy city to finish their rebellion, to put an end to their sin, to atone for their guilt, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to confirm the prophetic vision, and to anoint the most holy place. In the original, it's actually to anoint the most holy one. 70 sets of 7 is 70 weeks of years. The Hebrew people, God himself is kind of dramatic. He couldn't just say, hey, 490 years. 70 sets of 7 is 490 years. Daniel gets this vision from an angel that says, not only did we say 70 years you go back to Israel, something's going to happen about 490 years from now. Now listen and understand. And this is where it doesn't matter how much he says, listen and understand. When you read the next part, you'll go, I don't understand. 7 sets of 7 plus 62 sets of 7 will pass from the time the command is given to rebuild Jerusalem until a ruler, the anointed one, comes. Bottom line, there's an anointed one coming. And it's going to be 483 years from now, give or take. The Hebrew people seems God himself. This is why I like him. If you say, hey, can we meet Monday? My first answer will be no. But then if I say, well, maybe I can, I won't tell you. I'll meet you at this place at 2:30. I will say, around 2, you'll get a text from me at 1:30 that says, I'm going to be 15 minutes late. That's a lie. Amen. It's going to be 2:30 or 2:45. That's how I see time. I don't see time as fixed. You can talk about how I need counseling later. But that's sort of how the Bible is. So what I'm saying is me and Jesus are a lot alike. Jesus said he was going to be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. He was not. He was in the grave Friday night and kind of Saturday night. It's 2 nights. He was in there 1 day because it was late on Friday when they buried him, and it was really early on. The sun wasn't even up when he raised from the dead. The Hebrews didn't think of time like we do. They think of time like I do. But anyway, the bottom line is Daniel saying, you in the front. Daniel didn't say that.
They didn't think it's time the same way, so how do they get 3 days out of 1.5?
This will be a whole other subject that will take me an hour to talk about. Just understand, this is an example I use to talk about how we are anachronistic, which means we impose our modern values on ancient texts, on ancient people. If you've ever been to Central America, I remember being in Belize. See, you're bringing up old man stories. I remember being in Belize, and we were going to pour a concrete sidewalk at this missionaries complex, and we found a guy that actually had an electric mixer. And so instead of having to mix it by hand, we're going to hire this guy to come bring the mixer. And so you'll be here tomorrow at 8 in the morning. We need you here by 8. We'll get the form set up early. You be here by 8. Yep, I'll be here by 8. He was there at 2 and had no concept that he was late. In the least. Not in the least. You're in Central America, in the Philippines, they just, whenever we get there is fine. In Indonesia, this missionary talks about, and this is kind of how we did as Pentecostals growing up. Church is supposed to start at 10. But what that means is when the last person that we expect to be here shows up, we'll start. So, the Hebrews were very much that way. But let me move on. An anointed one is coming. This is actually a prediction, and it gives sort of a time period. Okay? The angel tells Daniel, Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. Don't worry, you're going to get to go back and rebuild it, despite the perilous times. After this period of 62 sets of 7, the anointed one will be killed, appearing to have accomplished nothing. In the first century, when the disciples saw Jesus killed, to them it was over. All of what they had sacrificed was for nothing. Yep, Daniel said that's what would happen. He would appear to accomplish nothing. And a ruler will arise after that, whose armies will destroy the city and the temple. 40 years after the death of Jesus, the Roman army came to Jerusalem and destroyed the city and the temple. And this was written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before that end. That happened. Okay? Did you ever wonder, and this is the only reason I shared this, and I sort of talked about it last week, but this is more the details. Did you ever wonder why 3 wise men showed up suddenly from the east looking for a new king? Why were people expecting a Messiah? I say it all the time. The people were expecting a Messiah. This is why. Because Daniel had prophesied, because of a visitation by an angel, that around that time there's going to be a new king arise. Daniel is the leader of the Magi, who are the wise men of Babylon, because he's in exile in Babylon. He became for various reasons, and with Darius the Mede, he's going to experience the lion's den thing, and Darius is going to basically put him in charge of everything. Well, he's teaching the Magi, this is going to happen. Be watching. So 480 years later, the Magi are heading to Jerusalem because there's supposed to be a new king. They did it because of Daniel. This really is a prediction, and you've never heard anybody talk about that on Christmas. Isaiah is not a prediction, and everybody says, a virgin will conceive, but they don't talk about this. Okay. I can see that you don't care at all. So, I'm sorry, you're limited to 17 questions a period. I'm just kidding. I know, Eric, that's why.
What's that have to do with the star?
You mean, what does the star have to do with that? Yeah. Them coming? Okay, are you ready? Yep. You get ready to write. I don't have any idea. There's lots of theories and speculation. The Magi were astrologers. So, to them, and I've heard lots of people say, because Jesus was born probably around 6 BC, that there was a what is it called? A conjunction of Jupiter and maybe Saturn, and so there was this bright star low on the horizon, looking to the west from them. I don't know. The part that bothers me more than anything is after they left talking to Herod, it says they left, and they followed the star, and it came and stayed right over the place. And we can't discount, maybe it's a supernatural thing. The guy that led the Bible school that I went to told a story once of holding this meeting, and it was a downtown area somewhere, and he said there's probably about 1,000 people in that room, and said, as I was speaking, a man came in the back door. That used to be how churches work. The churches I grew up in, you had a back door right there. You come in the back door, you can walk right down the aisle, Anyway, he said a guy came in the back door, and I could see him, nobody else could see him, and he looked wild. It looked like he'd just seen a ghost. And so I thought, well, maybe some drunk guy. But anyway, he said he sat there and listened. He sat on the back row, and as soon as I gave the altar call, he said he came, just jumped right up and came right to the front, and he motioned to me. He said, come here. He said, I was outside just walking down the street, and all of a sudden, I saw this light in the sky. I first thought, well, there's a meteor coming at us. He said, but it didn't keep coming to the earth. It just sort of hung there, and it started moving. And it took me, I followed it down this street, I followed it down another street, and it came, and it went in this building. So I just followed it in. And he accepted Jesus. He'd never heard about who Jesus was or whatever. Was that true? I don't know. But if it is, that's a supernatural thing. We hear lots of stories. I've heard multiple stories from Muslims. I'm sure it maybe happened with other Muslims where like Jesus appeared to them in a dream and explained who he was and where for them to go. Now, and we have a little bit of a precedent for that in Acts chapter 10, where Cornelius is praying, and an angel appeared to him and says, go down to Joppa and ask for Peter. He'll tell you words whereby you and your house will be saved. Well, why didn't the angel just tell him? Well, it led him to a person that would tell him about Jesus. Was there a supernatural ball of fire? I don't know. Okay? See, it takes me 5 minutes to say I don't know. That's why we have to stay here so long. Anyway, so let's talk about Luke's account of Jesus. Okay? Are you with me? Do you need to exercise? Do you have a question? Oh, I thought you had a question. Here's Luke chapter 1. And let me slow down a little. Luke is my favorite human being that wrote the Bible. I don't know. Between him and Paul, I really like Paul, but I dig Luke. Now, you've heard me, if you've been around me any time at all, talk about how certain events that most people think are historical, the creation of Adam, the Garden of Eden, the worldwide flood, they think those are historical. I say those are not historical. And I talk about the book of Jonah, that Jonah wasn't swallowed by a fish. This is a parable. It's a story that has a point, but it didn't actually happen. And so some people say, in fact, there's one guy on Facebook that's always saying to me, so you think the Bible is just one big parable? No, I don't think the Bible is one big anything. It's a collection of multiple books. They weren't always together. It was hundreds of years after the death and resurrection of Jesus that they assembled these various books in the New Testament, and there had already been some assembled from the Old Testament. They have different genres, okay? Let's say you're walking across the parking lot and you look down and there's a piece of paper and it says cherries, cranberries, stuffing, 1 turkey. What is that? It's a shopping list. A shopping list is a genre. Let's say that we go here a little further and it says, thaw turkey for 1 day. I don't know anything about turkey. Preheat oven to 350 degrees. Take 2 cans of cranberries, mix with 4 cans of corn. I don't know anything about cooking much. So now, what do we have? Is a recipe a different genre than a shopping list? Yes. See, we recognize that's a different genre. Now, let's say that then after Thanksgiving dinner, I don't know why we're talking about Thanksgiving. I'm really hungry right now. But after we have our little nieces there, and we say, hey, let me read you a story. And we open it up and we say, this is a story of a tortoise and a hare. And they're going to say, what's a hare? And you're going to say, it's a rabbit. Just pay attention. So, a tortoise and a rabbit, and they had a race. What genre is that? It's a fairy tale, or it's a fable. It's a made-up story that has a point, okay? Why we can't go to the Bible and recognize that, I have no earthly idea. But now, if we click on there and we see an article that says, on September 11th, 2001. And you know what happened. What genre is that? It's history. Okay. Well, some of you may think, you're going to talk to me about, it was an inside job. It's not history. We can talk about that later. But that's history. Now, if those were all put together in a book of things that happened in the 21st century, here's a person's shopping list. Here's what they made for Thanksgiving. They're different genres. Luke is not a parable because he tells us at the beginning what his genre is. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. He's very specific in the way he says things. And he's smart. He's a physician. He's detailed. And, this is really important, he wrote the book of Acts. We'll never get through everything I want to talk about. He wrote the book of Acts, which is full of accurate history that can be corroborated with outside sources. Luke is accurate. There is a historian that was not a believer from the 19th century and the 1800s named Sir William Ramsay. And he says, whatever you want to say about Luke, he is a top-notch historian. Luke is about to tell us history. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples, actual people, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning. I also have decided to write a careful account. Most Honorable Theophilus, it's probably a guy, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. Okay? Luke is talking about history. Now in Matthew, I need to skip this. I just want to get through Luke. There's so much cool things I want to talk about here, but I just want to get through it. We talked about this last week anyway.
I got a question.
Oh. You need to understand, I can be here all day.
The issue.
No, I can't be here all day.
All right, the virgin birth. Boom.
Okay?
If Mary wasn't a virgin,
I didn't say she wasn't a virgin.
I'm saying.
Oh.
If she was not a virgin, does that impact the whole coming of Jesus?
That's an amazing question. You want to write something else down?
No.
I don't know. I don't know. I want you to write down my answer. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know.
It's something I've thought about. It's something a lot of people think about. And here's why. See, this is why we started Jesus Talk anyway. Yeah. So I'll just stop. Like we're about to read Luke's account of Jesus' birth. Matthew's account is real short about her birth, but the whole wise men thing, he was a child. They weren't at the nativity. But Luke also says that an angel appeared to Mary, to a virgin, Mary. Luke calls her a virgin as well.
Exactly.
Matthew calls her a virgin.
Yep.
I believe that they call her a virgin because Mary says, hey boys, I was a virgin. This was miraculous. Okay? Does it matter that she was a virgin? Here's two things. Number one, the disciples never talked after Jesus' resurrection, never really talked about his birth at all. And some scholars, see, here's where I'm not going to give you a decision. I'm just going to give you what some scholars say. Some scholars say that Luke chapter 2, which is the account that we're about to read, see? Luke chapter 2, is very different in its Greek verbiage. And some suspect that the birth narrative was added not by Luke, but by someone else years later. Okay? I don't personally believe that, but because it freaks out some scholars. Not all scholars are Christians. One of my favorite scholar, he doesn't believe in God. But man, does he know the Bible. He used to believe in God, was really damaged by the church as part of his problem. But anyway, Bart Ehrman. I'd like to point out that Sarah didn't follow the protocol of actually raising her hand, but that's okay. She just blurted. That's good. You can do that, by the way. So, does it impact it? The disciples didn't talk about it, so I don't really care if he was born of a virgin or not. If he wasn't born of a virgin, Matthew is lying about Joseph, and maybe Luke is lying, or someone else later wanted to add it in to make Jesus even more than he is. Because, see this thing, and I don't talk about it too much, I believe in Jesus, even though I'm very aware of scholarly reasons to not, including the fact that, well, the Greek is very different in Luke chapter 2. And here's another thing, like the story of the woman that was caught in adultery that they were going to stone, Jesus said, see, that was originally in Luke. That wasn't in our oldest manuscripts. It's now in John chapter 8. But it was originally in some of the manuscripts that aren't the original with Luke. They stuck that story in there. Same thing with John. They stuck that story in. Well, does that mean it's not true? No. But to some scholars who, to me, are basing what they're saying on the fact that Christians want to believe that all the Bible was directly brought from God and at one time and is perfect and inerrant, instead of, well, there was a community of people who all were impacted by Jesus, and somebody after John, they read John's gospel, they're like, why didn't John tell about the time the woman was caught in adultery? And everybody said, yeah, let's put it in there. Well, that doesn't mean it's not true. So the same thing with the virgin birth. There are scholars who could bring some relatively convincing information to say, yeah, these narratives were made up later, and Jesus, his legend grew over time to where he was simply a man anointed by God, but okay, let's make him born of a virgin. That way he'll really be God himself. Okay? Do I think it matters if he wasn't born of a virgin? Right here, it would really bother me if he wasn't. That's my answer. I don't know if it makes him not God. In one sense, to me, it kind of does. And that's where I want to announce my bias. I want him to be born of a virgin. But the reason I believe he is above the difference in the Greek wording in Luke is the fact that Matthew, having experienced him and having had interaction, because Mary hung around them. And it's not just because I've watched The Chosen. The Chosen probably goes a little too far. But Mary was around them. And I can imagine around a campfire, Mary saying, Matthew, did you know that my baby boy, So does that make sense? I don't know, but because of Matthew, I believe she was a virgin. And Luke just says it in passing. Luke says it like it's an assumption. An angel appeared to a virgin that was espoused to Joseph, and then she went and talked to Elizabeth.
I have a question. Okay, so the woman caught in adultery, that bothers me. Why do you believe that even happened when there's so much in the Bible that you don't believe happened? I mean, is there documentation that proves that's true?
Well, and see, this is such a great question, because this is what people ask me all the time. And it goes back to genre clues. And this is where, and I'm sorry, this is where I always, during Jesus talk, I always tell people, you can leave at any time. Okay? There are different genres in the Bible, and then there are different levels within the genre. The reason when I'm trying to talk to an atheist about the historicity of who Jesus is, I always talk about Luke. Because Luke is the gold standard of, he verbalizes his intention to tell history of who Jesus is. Okay? I don't ever use John for these reasons. And I'm sorry, you guys all may get a certificate towards your theological degree after some of these classes. The reason I don't use John is John was the last gospel written. It's the furthest removed from Jesus, and historians, it gives more time for legend to grow. I'm not saying legend grew. I'm telling you what their reason is. I don't believe it. Now, John, for example, John starts with something that is not historically true. In John chapter 2, Jesus goes into Jerusalem at the beginning of his ministry and drives out the money changers from the temple. Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that happened the last week of his life. John has the right history in the wrong. You have a second sneeze? Oh, I was waiting. I'm a two sneezer, so I was waiting for your second sneeze. He has it in the wrong chronological spot. So some scholars will say, see, John's not right. No, John is from 2,000 years ago, and he doesn't care when it happened. He's making a theological point. He's sharing things that happened. This would be, if we could, at the beginning, we should subtitle John's Gospel, Things That Happened Around Various Festivals in Jerusalem. Everything in John happened around a festival. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, It may be Thursday afternoon in July. Not with John. It's around one of the major Jewish festivals. He's making theological points with them. And he has no concern as a first century author with, well, that didn't happen. Hey, John, that didn't happen till the end of his life. Well, John doesn't care. The reason I think that the story of the woman caught in adultery is true is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, their general genre is history. They are writing a documentary. They have been impacted, and at least for some or most, we know that they died a martyr's death, refusing to recant the history of this person named Jesus. They're all Jewish people who everything they're writing is worthy of death because they're blasphemous. They're saying this person is God. A human being is God. It's another reason why I don't have a problem with the virgin birth, because they actually believed he was God in the flesh. John starts with that. In the beginning was the Word. The Word became flesh, and he lived here. It's not just a story. Another thing is when I'm usually when I'm talking about something that is a parable or an epic, look up what an epic is. It doesn't just mean, that was awesome. It's some kernel of history that is magnified. All ancient cultures did it. Even actual history we have from the Roman Empire, that history is written by the people who won. And I always I say this all the time. My son rolls his eyes. He rolls my eyes. He rolls his eyes when I say it. I say, I'll be telling a story about how I shot, how I played basketball. And we didn't have a three-point line. And I always say, I'd average 40 points if it had a three-point line because that's where I shot. But then I always follow it up with, the older I get, the better I was. And so that happens with history. So you have to sprinkle all that in. But the reason, and I'm almost always talking about the Old Testament when I talk about that, which is ancienter than the accounts, and there is no thought about telling an actual event. Here's another thing, and see, we've gotten completely off the subject it's because of Eric and Cindy. When you look at any history in the world, this doesn't just have to do with the Bible. When you get, like, here we are in the 21st century, and we're walking backwards, and you get, around the Civil War, it gets murkier. And you get around the 1770s, and you got George Washington chopping down cherry trees and all kinds of things. You can't tell a lie, and I don't know if that's true or not. And the further back you go, it gets murkier. But then you get to the first century, and it's still okay. Then you get back, I have to start over here again. Now, here am I at Jesus' time. You get back to about 1000 BC. When you look, it's like Mufasa talking to Simba. You see that dark, shadowy place? You must never go there. After 1000 BC, it's dark and shadowy. In world history in general, but about 1000 BC, so many other nations are also keeping history that we can corroborate. We can go, okay, King David, they know who King David is too. So he must have actually existed. But when we start talking about, hey, there were all these miracles and frogs and flies, and they split the Red Sea and they came out of Egypt, and we go, nobody else seems to remember that. And we have no archaeological evidence of it. It gets murkier. And then we go back even further. Oh yeah, the whole world was flooded. Well, you got nothing. And you have other ancient civilizations telling big, huge, more than hyperbolic, embellished to the max epics about the Sumerians are some of the first written history we have. And they talk about their king, and their king reigned for 35,000 years. Well, they're simply using that to explain how big and great he was. He didn't live for 35,000 years. The history is just, it's like the Wild Wild West. But then you get around 1000 BC and we start talking about David and Solomon and Rehoboam and the northern kingdom split. And then the story of when Israel went up against King Mesha of Moab and he sacrificed his son and then they had to leave because something happened. Well, the Moabites also have that story. You know what I'm saying? We can corroborate it. The light is starting to shine. But by the time I get to Jesus, it's pretty well settled. I have 400 years of history between Malachi and the birth of Jesus, where the Maccabees and the revolution there, and when they overcame the revolt against the Jews, and for about 100 or so BC, they were free for just a little while, and then the Parthians are coming from here. We have good history, and it starts to become, we're not telling parables and stuff anymore.
So
Cindy's like, I wish I'd never asked the question. That's too much. No, she's saying, there's too much information.
with that explanation,
My wife always does that. I wish I wouldn't have asked you. Go ahead.
with that explanation you gave, that could just destroy the whole creation story, right? Did it happen that way or not?
Well, no, it didn't happen that way.
And it's just
The creation story originates, Enuma Elish is the kind of the same story that 1,000 years before then, the Babylonians had already written down. Enuma Elish is the story of the creation of the world. But again, to the ancient people, it's not a story about the creation of the world. It's a story about them. Genesis chapter 1 is a story about Israel. It's a story of their origin that they have co-opted. You understand co-opt? They've stolen from Babylon because when it was written down, guess where they were? Babylon. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it, but the exile to Babylon is the centerpiece of the entire Old Testament. They are writing down their origin, and so they say they've been taught this Enuma Elish from Babylon, and so they modify it, give it a Hebrew twist, and it's their origin. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void. The earth became without form and void. They are the earth. Darkness covered the face of the deep. To the ancient people, again, sorry, flat earthers that are watching, the Bible says it's flat earth. It's not. And that there is a snow globe over it. There's a dome over it. And look at the ocean, it's blue. Look at the sky, it's blue. Water, water. That the gods are holding back the water. When there's a big deluge, the gods are angry with us. They flooded all our crops. Everything is destroyed. We must have sinned. Judgment. Water and flood is a sign of judgment. Genesis chapter 1. The earth, Israel, has been flooded. Judgment. But God will bring us back to our land. The land is already there in the creation story. It's not a creation. This is me in Sunday school again, because it says, and the earth was without form and void. What, Mark? It says the earth was. This isn't a story about the earth being created, because at the beginning of this story, the earth's already there. And that's where the teacher goes,
shut up.
I don't know what to say. It's the story of creation because that's what I was taught. And then it goes through and talks about on day 1, God did this, but on day 5, 4, the dry land appeared. Why? Because the waters receded. The land was already there. It's Israel, we're the land, and we get to go back to our land. When the judgment, the waters that have fallen, recede, we get to go back to our land. We'll get to be fruitful and multiply. Vegetation, which is our sustenance, will reappear, and everything will be very good. Now, forget the fact that Genesis chapter 2 is an entirely different creation story. Entirely different. In Genesis chapter 1, the animals are created first, and then together, male and female humans are created on day 6. In Genesis chapter 2, Adam's created by himself. Can't find anybody, so then the animals are created. Let's see if we can find one. Well, why doesn't God know? God's like trying stuff out. Trial and error. But it's not about how humans were created. It's how Israel was created. Anyway, listen to the Christmas story. So anyway, here, you can say if you want to. Keep in mind, Papa Murphy's Pizza. Let's go through Luke and Matthew real quick. Because here's all I want to tell you. Since we've spent the whole time talking about history, and hopefully by the next time we meet, you'll forget how boring this was. But you'll come back. At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. Luke starts with a historical fact that almost all scholars agree did not happen. But I believe what Luke is talking about did happen. And if you're foolish enough to stay here, I'll explain to you why as quickly as I can. By the way, the King James Bible, if you're a King James only person, really gets this wrong and causes confusion. Because it says a decree went out through all the world. I don't know what. From Caesar. A decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be what? Enrolled. No, King James. Come on, Brian, you're a King James guy. That all the world should be
Counted.
Taxed. But it doesn't have to be, and the word taxed isn't there. It says that all the world should be registered. Okay? Keep that in mind. And keep in mind you can leave at any time, because this is only interesting to me. But it shows, because atheists and agnostics, whom I love, that's who I'm after. There are plenty of people that are Christians, and they're going to believe, and they're going to kind of follow Jesus, no matter what I say. But there are millions of people that can't get over some of the things that Christians have said about the Bible, and it becomes an obstacle to them. Okay? Caesar Augustus decreed that a census should be taken. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, this is where Christians read it, and they're like, I don't know what that means. Let's move on. This is the problem right here where people say the Bible's not true. Because Quirinius was the governor of Syria in 6 AD. The Greek is legate. He was the legate of Syria in 6 AD. What is the problem with that? Timing. Jesus, according to Matthew, was born before Herod the Great died. You think that's children's church? Or is there a guy in a low-riding vehicle passing by? That's children's church? Okay. I'm distracted so easily. Jesus was born before Herod the Great died. Herod the Great is the one that sent out the people to kill them all between 2 years of age. Herod the Great died in 4 BC. If the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered, and that's the reason that Joseph and Mary, who was pregnant at the time with Jesus, went back to Bethlehem, and it happened when Quirinius was governor of Syria, how can this be historically accurate? Because we got about a decade of timing off.
Considering how good it could take years.
But it happened, Luke says, Luke's the one who brought it up. He could have just been quiet about it. Luke brought it up that this happened when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and he started to be the governor of Syria in 6 AD. If it happened in 6 AD, Jesus is a 10-year-old boy. He may be starting to get chest hair. You know what I'm saying? If he was a Rowden, he would. Okay, so I know you're not interested, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There's all kinds of ways to think about this, and I just want to share with you, and I want to have it on video, and I'm not going into detail, but to just say there's a lot of things to consider. Number one, I give Luke the benefit of the doubt because in all the rest of Luke and all the rest of Acts, his history is spot on. He talks about things that we have lots of corroborating evidence, and he gets the names, and he gets the places, he gets the times right. Why all of a sudden does Luke lose his historical, acumen? Okay? First, another thing is Quirinius, it doesn't say in the original text that he was the legate of Syria. It says he was governing in Syria. It doesn't say he was the governor. That's the English translation. There was a time about 10 BC when Quirinius was in Syria as a military leader. In fact, he rose to prominence and probably eventually became the governor because of his success as a military leader. And he ran out these guys. Their name starts with an H, and I can't remember what it is. But it's very, very possible that at 6 BC, when Jesus was born, that he was in some sort of governing position. This would explain why Luke would take the time to say this was the first census taken when Quirinius was governing Syria. And Luke knows that there was a census in 6 AD when Quirinius was the actual legate of Syria, because he mentions it in Acts chapter 5. When Gamaliel says to the people that are about to kill or imprison Peter and John, Gamaliel says, do you remember when Judas, it was a different Judas, not Iscariot, he rose and he had a rebellion that he got some Jewish people together and he launched a rebellion against the Roman government. That rebellion was quickly put down. Luke is telling that story. That rebellion happened in 6 AD when Quirinius was governor of Syria. The rebellion was because Thaddeus didn't think the Jewish people should pay taxes. So he got an army together to combat and protest by force this taxation. That happened in 6 AD. Luke knows that happened. He writes about it in Acts chapter 5. So why would he make the mistake of putting Jesus in the wrong spot? I don't think he is making a mistake. I think there was another census, and I will tell you why. It was the first one, the one in Acts chapter 5 that he mentions, which happened in 6 AD, was the second one. That's why he says the first one. Also, hang on, I got 4 things I want to say. Because people say there was no census given by Augustus for people to, number one, travel back to their ancestral home, to be registered for taxation. In fact, when they register for taxation, because we have a document from Egypt that tells that the people had to go to their own home to be registered so they could pay taxes and attend to the farming that actually produced the income to pay those taxes. So you wouldn't go to the town that your family is from, you would go to your own house. You had to be at home when they came by, and then after that, you need to get to work farming on your property. There wasn't a census for them to be taxed until 6 AD. But there was a registration that happened 4 to 6 BC where Augustus caused people to, it was a power play on his part. The Romans came to this doctrine, and I think it kind of started with Augustus, that the emperor was actually divine. So everyone in the Roman Empire had to be registered and verbally say, Caesar is God. See, this happened. This was why it was such a big deal when the Christians, after Jesus' death, would say, Jesus is Lord. Because that was an expression they said about Caesar. Caesar is Lord. Well, they were supplanting Caesar as the ruler. Well, there were 6,000 Pharisees, according to Josephus, prior to BC, 4 BC, 6 BC, 6,000 Pharisees that refused to call Caesar the father of their country. There must have been some sort of registration, or Josephus wouldn't have known there were 6,000. This is where I lost you guys a long time ago. My point is, there were other registrations besides one to be taxed that could have and probably did happen before the one that happened when Quirinius was actually the legate of Syria. He was governing. Luke knows this. The people he's writing to know this. It's simply been lost to history, the documents that happened at that time. So you can believe it or not. I just want to tell you. All returned to their own ancestral homes, towns for this census. And because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea. Scholars say this story is made up to get Jesus to be born at Bethlehem because Micah predicts, which we find out in Matthew, that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. And Jesus is Jesus of Nazareth. They say so later that created a problem. I don't think it creates a problem because Joseph is a carpenter. He's actually a stonemason. He's traveling all over. It's not a big area. It would be like, well, there's no work in Waynesville right now. I'm going to go to St. Louis for a while and work. It's not even that far away. It's not as far away as St. Louis. Joseph is in Nazareth. I believe they're from Bethlehem. Mary, we know, is from Bethlehem. They're returning there because that is their home. I don't believe they actually lived in Nazareth until after they came back from Egypt. Okay? He had to go to Bethlehem. He traveled there. He took his wife, who's obviously pregnant. When they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to her first child, a son, wrapped him snugly, laid him in a manger because there's no lodging available for them. King James, you got to read your Bible, Brian. There was no room for them in the what? In the inn. If you grew up in a church like me, you had to perform a Christmas pageant every year. And so at one point, you had to find the guy that was the most hateful and didn't have to remember very many lines. And he played the innkeeper. And Mary showed up. Is there any room for us? And he just opened the door and said, no, go somewhere else. I got a barn out back. Slam. And that was the innkeeper. Totally, it's just made up. It's not what happened. Okay? Here is, and I'm about to stop. This is kind of what a first century home would look like. Mary didn't have to find a stable because all the hotels were booked. Okay? There was no room for her in the, what is that? The Ketaluma? It's the upper area. I can't remember the word. Up in this area is where the day-to-day activities happen. We're going to cook. We're going to eat. Things are going to happen up here. But there's this area down here. When it's cold at night, you might bring some of your animals actually in. It's like a little courtyard inside the house. If you've been to other countries, like to me it's the coolest thing. I don't know why we don't do it. You go to Nicaragua and Peru, the houses have a huge wall around them. And then there's a courtyard. You don't have like the house with covenants that say you can't put your fence in the front yard. No, you build that first, and then nobody can get in. And so you could bring your animals inside. In the house, there would be a manger. This downstairs area, there was no room in the Ketaluma. I can't remember how it's pronounced. This is this area up here. She's home with her family. And of course, their extended family is living in the house. That's how ancient cultures did. This is, by the way, something I'm so glad we don't do. I don't want Grandma to live with me. But, I mean, it'd be fine now because she's dead. It'd be nice to see her. But after a while, she's going to have to find her own place. So anyway, there's no room. There was no room in the, I don't remember the word, Ketaluma. It's not in. There's no room up here. So they stayed downstairs inside the house. And they put Jesus in the manger in the house. Okay? And so here's the bottom line. I'm going to skip a bunch. There's angels. There's all kinds of stuff. They're singing. And they hurried to see it, the babe, all the shepherds. Mary kept these things in her heart. And 8 days later, he was named Jesus. Merry Christmas. Here, let me say this. Hold your question, Eric. Here's what I talked about last week. Then it was time for the purification offering. This is after Jesus has been born, as required by the law of Moses after the birth of a child. After the birth of a child, the firstborn child, 40 days later, you have to take the child and give an offering. If you have a lot of money, you give a goat or a sheep. If you don't have money, you give a turtle dove or a pigeon. If you come to my barn, you can have all the pigeons you want. And so the parents took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. The law says, if a woman's child is a boy, it must be dedicated to the Lord. So they offered the sacrifice a pair of turtle doves, and 2 young pigeons. This is how we know Mary and Joseph weren't very wealthy, because the Old Testament gives specifications. If you don't have much money, you can do this. Okay? Here's the problem, and I talked about it just a little bit last week. If Matthew's account is a birth account, and the wise men were at the manger, the very night that the wise men were there, Joseph gets up and takes Jesus to Egypt and stays there, Matthew says, until Herod dies, which is 2 years later. How then is Jesus at the temple 40 days after his birth in Jerusalem when he's staying in Egypt? This is where atheists go, aha, gotcha. But they don't got me, because the story in Matthew is not the birth narrative. There weren't camels around a barn. The wise men didn't show up till about 2 years later. It's not a problem. But here, they're offering sacrifices in the temple 40 days after. And that's the story of how Jesus got born. Okay.